Hello, everyone, and welcome to the free masterclass for Act Like a Great Communicator. I am so glad that you are watching the replay. And today we have Vicki and Nisha live. I'm so excited. We have a few more people who are joining us later. But right now, we are going to talk about thinking on your feet. What to say when you don't have time to prepare. So it's one thing when you're doing a presentation or maybe a class. You've practiced all these thoughts in your mind. You've practiced your outline. Or maybe you're going to an interview and you've given some thought to what you want to say or a podcast. But there are times when people ask you that question. So, Vicki, what do you think? And all of a sudden, the brain starts doing all kinds of weird things. You've got all the knowledge, you've got all the experience, but suddenly your brain freezes for a millisecond and it says, I don't know what I think. And then you're trying to organize your main point, your brain, you want to make sure that you sound smooth with you. Then how do you respond? All of these things happen in a millisecond. So what you need to do is respond in a way that makes sense. And what most people do is they answer instantly. They start talking instantly. And you okay? Okay. And what they don't need to be doing is you don't need to speak instantly. What you need to do is be able to organize your thoughts instantly. And that is where we get into people who ramble because their mouth starts working before their brain does. And then while they're trying to think, while their mouth is moving, they start to ramble. They start to repeat their thoughts. They add filler words like and ah. They add all of these qualifiers like, well, I was thinking that maybe I could, or we should maybe consider. Those are all qualifiers. That's not what you want because it makes you sound uncertain. What you need to do is adopt the 2-second pause. The 2-second pause is going to seem like eternity, but it's only 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. That's it. 2 seconds. Your brain works incredibly fast, faster than your mouth does, when you give it the opportunity to. So when you pause for 2 seconds, that gives you the opportunity for your brain to organize your thoughts if you are trained in how to do that. Now, you've all heard me talk about point first communication, which is what's your point, one example, what are the next steps, and then stop talking. I have a slightly different version today because this has to do with when somebody asks you a question. And sometimes next steps are not the appropriate thing to do. So we're going to do the 4 Ps: pause, point, proof, pass it on. So pause, that's your 2-second pause. Point, that's the main point you're going to say. So if someone asks you, where are we on the project? Or are you ready to launch? The point is not, we met last Thursday and then we realized we needed to talk to accounting and accounting found a problem. That's not your point. Your point is, are you ready to launch? That's a yes or no question. Your point is yes or no. It is not all of the extraneous history. So pause, give them your point. No. Give them your brief explanation. We found 2 technical issues that will affect the customer experience. And then you want to pass it on. Stop talking and wait for the other person to ask additional questions if necessary. So pause, point, proof, pass it on. Now, one thing that makes people uncomfortable with that is they feel the need to fill the space. Because after you stop talking, there's going to be silence. If nothing else, it's the 2 seconds that your listener is taking a moment to get his or her thoughts together. So, silence is okay. Don't fill it. Now, I don't know if either one of you want to volunteer to demonstrate, pause, point, proof, and pass it on. But if I have any volunteers, my question is going to be, is remote work good for communication? That's a tough one, but I want to ask because these are the kind of things that people could ask you when you're not prepared. Okay, go ahead, Vic.
I'm going to do the pause first, make my point, yes. Proof, because it has more productivity time than when you have to travel to the office and back. The average person loses 2 hours in the traveling because of traffic and morning.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And then you pass it on. Excellent. Nisha, would you like to try or not today?
I could try.
Great. The question is remote work good for communication?
Yes, and it's because you communicate in multiple ways, whether it's phone, email, or team meetings.
Very good. Very good. And the way I would answer that would be it depends. While there are a lot of benefits to remote work, like Vicky said, with transportation and wasted productivity time, communicating remotely can be very challenging for some people because they need to be face to face and things can be misunderstood in emails and texts and even communicating by Zoom because people don't always feel comfortable. So they need to be trained to communicate most effectively when they're not in person. That's my opinion. Now, what do you do when you're put on the spot, when you don't have time to prepare, and someone asks you a question that you really don't know the answer to? And this is a tough one because most people feel the need to BS their way through it, or they sort of ramble and say, well, that's an interesting question. I've never really thought about it. And so they're rambling and they're doing filler words. If you don't know the answer, the most credible way to address that is simply, I don't know. Now, you may say, I don't know the answer to that, but, and then answer something that is related to that so that you're giving them your opinion. Or the answer is, I don't know. That's a great question. I'll have to verify that answer before I can answer you. But being credible means being ready to say, I don't know. So when you don't have an answer, that's what you need to do. Now, what do you do when you need more time? When you really need to process this, because this isn't something that comes to you instantaneously. Then there are 4 options. The first option is to buy yourself a little time by repeating the question. Again, your brain works faster than your mouth. So if you know how to organize your thoughts, like pause, point, proof, pass it on. Then you can buy yourself just a little bit of time. If I ask you, what do you think about remote work for communication? And the answer to that might be, is remote work good for communication? I've never thought about that before. You just bought yourself about 4 seconds. And that should be enough time if you have an opinion and an answer for you to put it back on them and begin to answer the question. If not, although this is more of an opinion than a fact, so I don't know that you would say, I don't know, but this might be, I don't know the answer to that, but here is my initial thought. But you want to repeat the question back. Good morning, Dee Dee. I'm glad you're here with us today. The second way that you can address it is to clarify. So, for example, if someone says, do you think the launch is going to be successful? One thing you could do to buy yourself some time is to clarify, and that may be, how are you defining success from a company standpoint or a customer experience standpoint? So you're now clarifying what they want to say so that you can more effectively answer. In that example, it gives you, first of all, clarity on how you're answering the question. You don't want to answer about a company perspective when what they really wanted to know was the customer experience perspective. They just didn't clarify their question initially. So it gives you an opportunity to clarify. It also buys you those extra seconds that you need. Now, if you also want to address that, for example, in that question about do you think the launch is going to be successful? You may have two conflicting thoughts and you're not sure what she means. Does she mean the customer experience or does she mean from a company perspective? And in that case, you might say, there are two issues I'd like to separate on that. And then you proceed to explain the customer experience opportunity. So you're giving yourself more options, which can make it easier for you to organize. And finally, the other option when you don't have your thoughts completely together is to say, my first reaction is. So you're giving them top of mind. Now, as you're talking, you may think of something else because, again, you're buying yourself time for your brain to organize your thoughts. And that's what it's all about. Now, when you say your first reaction is, that doesn't mean that you don't pause first. You still pause. But if you still don't have anything, you can give them your top of mind answer with my first reaction is. So those techniques are to repeat the question, to clarify what they asked. If you have more than one thought, say, I've got two thoughts on that. And if you do have a top of mind answer, but you haven't totally organized your thoughts, is to say, my first reaction on that is. Now, what if you've got all of these thoughts, but they're so disorganized in your brain that after a 2-second pause, you're still not ready to answer the question? And in that case, if you've got 3 thoughts knocking around in your brain, then consider that an emergency structure. That's where you're going to say, well, there are 3 things I would consider. Now, in that case, you can bounce off the 3 ideas that are whirling around in your brain. And as you're talking them through, you're probably going to come up with something that makes more sense to you. Or to say, here are the three things I would consider. And now that I've said them out loud, I think the one that I would highly recommend is my second option. And then that's when you give your point, your proof, and you pass it on. Now, that's a technique that hopefully you don't need to use very often because that gives you the opportunity to ramble, and you don't want to do that. But if you really don't have any other options, if those first points of repeating the question, clarifying, giving two options, and then saying my first reaction is, then you go with your emergency option. That is an emergency structure that you only use in emergencies because it can be dangerous in terms of rambling. Now, what do you do when someone disagrees with you? Because that's really a case where you can feel unprepared and you really have to think on your feet. And in that case, I recommend that you use my calm method. The calm method is something that I introduced in my difficult conversations course. And that is a situation where calm is an acronym. C stands for curiosity. You want to choose curiosity when somebody is attacking you. Next, you want to acknowledge their emotions. The third is that you want to listen intently. And the fourth is that you want to move the conversation forward. So if someone comes up to you, you've just expressed your point on something, or you're in a presentation or whatever, and someone says, I disagree with that point. It's very easy to get defensive, especially if you have prepared what you're saying or you have organized your thoughts, because now they've taken you off track and they have challenged you. So it's easy to take that personally. It's easy to feel attacked, but you don't want to do that. You want to pause. Once again, the pause is huge in this. So you pause for your 2 seconds to get your thoughts together. And then you adopt calm. And C is choose curiosity. Because the first thing you want to do is ask them a question. You don't start defending yourself immediately because you don't know what they disagree with. So what you want to say is, could you explain to me what you disagree with? Or can you help me understand why you feel that way? You want to put it back on them for a couple of reasons. The first reason is you're now making them feel heard. And when people feel heard, it often diffuses the situation. So you're not defending yourself. You are reaching out to them and making them feel heard. Next, you want to acknowledge the emotion. If they have strong emotions about something where they really are attacking you, you want to acknowledge that by saying, I can see that you are upset about the situation. I can see you're really bothered here. Can you help me understand why you're feeling this way? So you want to acknowledge the emotion, and that also helps diffuse the emotion in the situation. And by remaining calm, you are mirroring, or not mirroring, you are setting the tone for the room. You're setting the tone for the person. If you start getting defensive and raising your voice and snapping at them in the same way that they could be snapping at you, you're just feeding them. And you don't want to do that. This is a situation where you do not want to mirror the person that you're communicating with. What you want to do is to Acknowledge their emotion to diffuse it and demonstrate calm. The third is listen intently. You have asked them a question, so now listen to them. Don't just blow it off. Say, well, Karen, I asked him a question. Yes, but you need to listen intently. You need for them to understand that you're hearing them. You will also, by listening intently, clearly understand what it is that is bothering them. Because it may be one small point. It may be that they just had a bad day and they're taking it out on you. Until you listen, you don't really understand what the problem is. And the M stands for moving it forward. What you don't want to do is go back and attack them. You don't want to raise the emotion of the situation. Your goal is to move the conversation forward, to address the issue. Now, sometimes you can address that issue while you're there. Other times you may need to say something like, that's an interesting point. Can you help me understand the risks that I'm not seeing? And after they've told you what they think, you can say either what you think the situation is and or you can say, those are some interesting thoughts. I'd like to talk to you about that after this meeting, so that you're not taking the meeting time and other people's time. They've had an opportunity to express their opinions, and now you're going to move on with the conversation. However, if you tell them you're going to meet with them later, meet with them. Don't just blow them off. You want to have an opportunity. And another advantage of that is that they will have had the opportunity to diffuse their emotions somewhat. Yes, Dee Dee.
Many conversations can be reasonably dealt with, but I've noticed with the new gen that a lot of them look at conversations as manipulation situations, and they automatically run into I'm not following the rules, or I'm going to be, I'm going to get what I want at any cost. And in those cases, you aren't going to win by being soft. I do like the suggestion you made. I would like to talk with you later and so on. But when you see that it's being manipulated, and I see this when people do a lot of those reruns of what comes off the body cams of police or things like this, as an example, where the person, no matter what they do or what the policeman says, they're not going to comply. They don't want to. They're doing everything possible until the policeman has no other choice but to use force. In our situation, as communicators, what is a good suggestion when it comes down to the point of tough conversation?
Very good. Vic, do you want to share before I weigh in?
Well, yeah, I want to add on to that conversation because I had a similar thought. One of the reasons that I left corporate America is because there is manipulative conversation. And the manipulative conversation means that you don't actually know what the real is, and thus you can't really deal with the real problem. You're dealing with somebody who's trying to negotiate. It's like communicating as a chess game. And it's, I'm going to make this move here, and you're going to make this move here because you're ignorant of what I'm trying to do. And I get that. And when I looked at the point, pause, proof, pass it on method, I think one of the things that I do is presence. And the presencing is something that helps me figure out my red flag. Like when I'm listening to a conversation, and I'm getting a red flag, like this is somebody who has an agenda of their own or some sort of creepy thing, then what do you do? And in that, the pause is so important because that first part of it is how I realize I think it's presencing that is the big deal. And I wondered what you thought, because this is the point, the pause point, proof, pass it on, is for people who are willing to be present with each other and are truthful and want to, how do we reconnect? And when somebody doesn't want to connect and they're not interested, or it becomes problematic somehow. And I wondered, what do you do in those situations? I know what I do, and I will hold a firm boundary,
Mhm.
and I want to know what you do. And in that situation, how would you verbally, what would you do differently than what's in the pause point, proof, pass it on thing? And I'm certain that there's some questions, but what would you do with that?
I agree with both of you that there are times when your basic conversation is not going to work because they're looking to sabotage you. They're looking to manipulate you. They want to make you look bad in the meeting. So they want to throw you off your game. They want to show that they have a different opinion because they're smarter than you. Um, and none of that is true. So while you're right, the pause, point, proof, pass it on does not always work in that situation. I do stand by the fact that the calm method can work. And I do think that part of that calm method in that situation is still move it on. And that's where it may be, let's take this after the meeting. But it's still important for you to meet them where they are. And by staying calm, you're showing them that you can't be flustered, that they aren't winning. And that's what they need to see because they want to manipulate you. They want to make you look stupid. They want to put you on the spot. And so by staying calm, I don't want to sound nasty, but by staying calm, you're basically giving it back to them saying, screw you, you can't affect me. And please go ahead.
Well, I think that calm method is really important because you're right about having to show that you're not defensive, that you're present.
Mhm.
And um, I think for me, in several instances, when you've been asked a really tough question, what I do in the pause for me that helps is I try to read the intention of the person that's asking the question. What's their intention?
Yep.
Because I know for me, in the tonality of the way they ask the question, whether it's ego driven or sabotaging or complete curiosity, and that presencing in the conversation, I think this is so important to not just learn the pause point, proof, and pass it on, but the calm method. And then, presencing in a way for me, it's like communication is a full body experience for me.
Yes.
And there are nuances to it. And if someone starts out in the calm method, in the curiosity space, if somebody's, let's just say somebody asks a really crappy, mean question and they're trying to one up you or whatever you want to call it. Do you ask the question in the curiosity phase? And if I get a direct question, like if somebody asks a certain question and I know they're trying to sabotage me, I'll ask them a question, but it's not about the topic. I'll say, it sounds to me like you're angry. Is that true? Or it sounds to me like you're resentful. Is that true? I'm trying to name the intention as the question versus
Mhm.
tell me more about that.
Mhm.
And I would ask you, you know, which one would you do if I spot you trying to do that now? If I spot you, I'll ask the question because they don't want you to know that you see their intention. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes,
And
I
how
do.
would you do it out of the starting off in the calm method? Somebody is like, "Well, why do we have to blah, blah, blah?" And I read their intention and I say something back. What would you do as far as the curiosity phase of that? What question would you fire at them other than,
Well, I would start with, can you help me understand your perspective? Can you help me see the risks that I'm not seeing? Other related questions to that. Put it back on them. Because if their intention, particularly, is to make you defensive, they're probably not going to have an answer to that, or they're going to fumble on the answer. So you want to make sure that you're 100% right on what their reasoning is. And then I don't think it's unrealistic to ask them the question that you just posed about, you seem angry, you seem resentful, you seem a little aggressive about this, because that ties into the A of acknowledging emotions, because you want to understand their intent. And if they are angry, aggressive, resentful, whatever, you've now named it. And that's important because they may not realize that they're doing that. Or if they are, they know they've been caught.
well, that's the whole point.
Yes.
They've been caught up front because if there's a meeting of 3 people or 6 people or an audience, everyone can feel when somebody's happy, mad, sad, or afraid, aggressive, angry, or trying to sabotage. The whole room can feel it.
Yep.
So if I point it out and I say to them, you sound resentful, or you sound angry, or you sound like you have another opinion about this. And I say that out loud. The room, I have agreement with the room
Yes.
or what's in there. What I want is agreement. So
Yes.
that person there can't lie. Everybody is in agreement that this person feels. I'm trying to call them to the state that they're at without them faking it, because that's what sabotage is. Sabotage is somebody who gets away with
Mhm.
asking the question. And in high stakes situations where your life is depending on it, um, just asking the question, you seem like you're so angry that you feel violent. Is that true?
Mhm.
You know, just asking that because I want to name the feeling they're feeling.
And that's a perfectly fair question. And that ties in the curiosity and the acknowledging the emotion,
Mm.
because you want to, and it depends on the situation. If you're in a meeting and they're sort of pissy, then you can ask another question first. Can you help me understand your perspective? If you're in an audience, they're in an audience, then you don't really want to engage them. You don't want to give them the limelight. So that's where you nip it in the bud. And the question you ask is acknowledging the emotion, is naming the emotion and getting them to respond, because that can diffuse them. Now, it may not. And in that case, you'll need to take other action because, but you do want to listen to them. You do want to give them an opportunity to say, you're darn right I'm angry because yada, yada, yada. And if that's not relevant to the conversation, if they're just, I don't know, they're there to agitate and cause problems, then you say, I would be love to talk to you about this after. And if not, and you're in an audience, then you're going to have to ask for some help to get them out of there. But in a meeting, normally you can diffuse it with curiosity and acknowledging emotions. But it's a fair question. You sound like you sound aggressive about this. You sound resentful. Is that right? So Acknowledging their emotion can be a lot of different things. It can be calling them on it, which is what you're saying, to name it and be really clear up front, especially if they're very aggressive, because you don't want that aggression to turn into something else that it shouldn't be. But don't hesitate to say, let's talk about this afterwards. And if they aren't willing to do that, if they aren't willing to move it on, then you need to ask them if they can leave. And that's perfectly fine, because there is no reason that you should be attacked. If this is a professional person, even if they're agitated, the second you call me on it and you say, Karen, you seem really agitated about this, then that gets me to the point where I say, darn, I am agitated. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be that way, but I'm angry. And here's why I'm angry. So by calling them on it, you really are pinpointing it, unless they're past the point. If you're in an audience situation and they're past the point of calming themselves down, and then you need to ask for help to get them out of the audience, because they'll just be a distraction. In a meeting or in a group of a few people, you should be able to address the situation in the calm method. And most importantly, moving it forward. If they aren't willing to do it, then tell them you'd like to discuss it privately later. Does that answer your question, ladies? Okay, Dee Dee, what else do you have?
Is there a difference between leading the meeting and being a participant in the meeting on the choices you have, especially if the person leading the meeting doesn't really practice calm or anything else, and they're letting someone else beat up on someone else in the meeting?
Well, if you are leading the meeting and someone is being aggressive with you or someone is challenging you,
Mhm.
then the calm method works perfectly fine.
Right.
If you're not getting support from the leader of the meeting or leadership in the conversation, then you still need to pursue the calm method, unless it's the leader who is supporting the person who is being aggressive with you. And then you need to juggle. That's more complicated, because now you've got two people coming at you. But the most important thing through all of that is, no matter how you feel inside, you appear calm on the outside. It's a sign that I had when I first started working at Baltimore Gas and Electric. The sign said, be like a duck. On the surface, be calm, cool, and collected. Underneath the water, paddle like hell. So underneath, you may be just paddling away and wanting to smack the heck out of them. But on the surface, you need to be very calm and not. First of all, you're showing them an incredible amount of executive presence by keeping your emotions stable. But you're also reinforcing that you can't be flustered, whether one or both of them are trying to sabotage you.
I took a course in communications and not so long ago, and they talked about the type of communication used in media and in political debate that's meant to create a situation. And I look at these and I think, they're trained, these kids in college and coming out are trained to talk in a combative, argumentative, strategic way that's actually made to tear things down. And once they've tore it down, they've accomplished what they've, came for. It's like if you're building something up and you're starting meetings and you're dealing with a new business, a lifeboat business, and you get some of these actors on It's just like a troll on a website.
Mhm.
It ruins everything. And I'm thinking, wow,
It's
you
tough.
know,
You're absolutely right. Um, the kids are coming out of college that way, being taught to be combative. In a media situation, depending on what the scenario is, if you are the counterpoint, they're going to be aggressive with you. Um, or just a regular conversation. It can be very tough, but and I'll be right there, Vic. But I would continue to say that the most important thing is for you to stay calm and continue to pursue the calm method. Because even if they want to be aggressive and their goal is to tear you down, by staying calm, you're still winning. By asking a question to clarify, you're still winning. And even in a media situation, to say, you're becoming very aggressive and I'm not. Could you, let me speak. Um, Listen to what they have to say. But then your goal is to move the conversation on, because if you're not going to win and they're just going to keep picking at you and picking at you and picking at you, then moving the conversation on may be as simple as, it doesn't seem like we're going to be able to address this now. So I'm going to excuse myself. And when you are calmer, not you, not me, but to say, when you are calmer,
Mark,
I would love to continue this conversation. But just by staying calm, you're really ticking them off, because they want to tear you down. They want to sabotage you. And if they don't get to do that, they don't win. You win. And that just will really annoy the heck out of them. What did you have, Vic?
Well, you kind of answered it, but I am the kind of person that knows, I absolutely know kindness kills any aggression, and
Mhm,
empathy kills any aggression in conversation, full stop. And
mhm,
the awareness of when to use that is kind of a practice. You do it over and over again. The world is full of people who want to connect. They want to be good communicators, calm, lovely people. And then there are some actors, and I would say a lot of it is media, politics, and just some people who are wanting to win something that doesn't exist. So they want to win the conversation, or they think there's something to win.
mhm,
But in real communication, for me, the thing is, how can I connect or reconnect with you?
mhm,
And I think you answered that really brilliantly just a minute ago. And the other thing is, if I have too many of these people, I leave
mhm.
and go somewhere else and make new friends. Just say,
Exactly. Because there are times when you're not going to win. You have to be able to walk away. And you walk away calmly. You don't stomp off. You walk away by acknowledging, I don't think we're going to agree on this one. And so I'm going to leave and you all can continue the conversation, because you need to protect yourself. You can do that without being defensive. It's hard, but becoming defensive only makes the situation worse. It feeds the negative energy that's going on. And once you feed the dragon, it's only going to get worse. You're going to get burned, because it will affect people's impression of you. It will affect your executive presence. Now, if you choose to walk away, that does not affect your executive presence if you've done it properly. If you've stayed calm and you've said, it doesn't appear that we're going to be able to get a resolution on this. So I'm going to step away now,
Mhm.
but I'd love to continue this when you're calmer. That will not affect your reputation. Stomping off will, getting defensive will, and it won't, and becoming defensive will not fix the problem. It will feed it. So when somebody comes back to you and says something like, you said the project was on schedule, why is it late? Well, they're not intending to attack you, they just want to know the answer to your question. But it can feel like an attack, especially if you're already upset because the project is late. And in that case, if you know the project is late, there are no questions to ask. At that point, curiosity is not an option because they've been very clear. And you already know why it's late. But you can say something like, yes, it is. And I'm sure that's very frustrating to you because it's frustrating to me. But here's the point, proof, pass it on, and then listen intently to what they have to say. And then move the conversation forward. If the conversation is, I mean, you're obviously, if it's late and you know it's late, then you can address why it's late and what you're doing about it. Now, if you didn't know the conversation was late, then that's where you can use the whole calm method where you say, I was unaware that it's late. Can you please tell me more about that? At that point, then you acknowledge their emotion. Well, that's very frustrating. I'm sure you're feeling it just like I am. And then listen to what they have to say and move it forward. I'm going to jump on that right away. I'm going to go talk to the project leader. And I will get back to you with an explanation and a revised timeline. The last thing I want to share is that, and you did it beautifully earlier, Nisha and Vicky, when I asked the question about, is remote work good for communication? You kept it to under 60 seconds. And that's hugely important. When you have to think on your feet, you want to keep it to 60 seconds. You can do that with pause, point, proof, and pass it on. You can do that with calm, where you're only speaking 60 seconds at a time. In the calm method, you need less than 60 seconds. Because if you go more than 60 seconds, number one, you're going to ramble. And number two, you've missed your point. You've buried your point. Or even if you started with it, they forgot what it was because you kept talking about all these other things. Yes, Vicki.
Well, as I'm reflecting on that exercise that you gave Nisha and I realized for myself that my pause, point, proof, and pass it on system, I didn't hear the question correctly. I didn't hear, is communications good for? Because I would have had a different answer. I was thinking about, when I heard it, I heard it so vastly different that I wonder what we could have done to say, let me ask the question again to you so that you understand it differently.
Mhm.
Because I didn't answer the question. I answered something completely different about productivity and time. And you were like, good try, and I would have rather heard, let me ask the question again differently so you understand it or something. But thank you for being encouraging. And what could you have done? What could we have done so that somebody understood the question better?
Well, first and foremost, and this is something that I caught myself afterwards and thought, darn, I should have done it differently. What I should have done is repeated the question just before you answered, which is what I did for Nisha. I didn't do it for you. I said the question, and then I talked about several things, and then I asked you to answer the question. So the question was buried way up here somewhere. And I think that if I had asked the question immediately before you spoke, I think we would have been in a better position. Because that I put you in an unfair advantage there by asking it way up here and then talking about other things. It's easy to lose track. And that's where the 60-second conversation goes. Even if you start with your point first, when you start talking about other things, the listener moves on. And then at the end, they're trying to remember what you said in the beginning. Even if you only talk for 60 seconds, that's not long.
Yeah, I realize I make that mistake a lot when I ask a question and then I give context, and I should probably give context first and then ask the question. I realize while you're talking, I'm like, oh, I do that all the time. I ask the question up here and then I give it a bunch of debris underneath it. And by the time their time to answer the question, they have forgotten what it was.
Mhm.
So context first and then the question. Context first, then the question. Thank you for that. That was a great insight.
Yes. Yes, Miss Dee.
Yeah, that's a real dyslexic problem I have, or some kind of, is when people move um, on or give explanations. My mind is in what they're saying. If my mind is in the question, I'm not listening. So
Mhm.
mine is what they're saying. I lose everything I wanted to ask them, anything question I have. And because of what they're talking about, I can't get back to it, because I can't listen and think at the same time,
Mhm.
you know?
A tip that I used years ago, because I would get together with friends over coffee and they would be talking about something. And I would think of something. I didn't want to interrupt them, but I would think of something that I wanted to ask, or they would trigger another thought in my brain. And so it got to the point where we both brought tablets with us when we would have coffee, and we would write down questions while we were talking. And it probably looked ridiculous to other people, how rude, they're talking and she's making notes. But it really saved it because, like you said, Dee Dee, when people keep talking about other things, your brain moves on. And you can't listen and think at the same time sometimes. Or you totally lose what you were going to say because you were listening to them.
Well, if you're listening to them, it's triggering different thoughts.
Yes.
So you have moved on. Period. That's just it. As soon as someone says a purple cow, you're over there with the purple cow. Um, so yeah, I you asked us who we thought was the best communicator ever, and I said Griffin Durndorf, and you asked who it was. And Griffin Durndorf had her sweater on, and she had a little tiny pad with those little tiny pencils. And
Mhm.
she always carried 4 or 5 little tiny pencils and a pad with her, no matter where she went. And when she was talking to people, she'd just pull them out and start jotting it down. And after you mentioned that tip, when I started to write down my questions and so on, I have always had the paper in front of me.
Mhm. It's important. And you can't always do that. I understand that sometimes it's just not an appropriate venue. But when you can, it really makes a difference. And when I would have coffee with friends, it would be perfect because you certainly don't want to interrupt, but you don't want to miss that important thing that you wanted to ask them or that story that was just so funny that you want to share with them. So that's a technique that you can use. So the bottom line is that you don't need to be the fastest thinker in the room. You need to be the most organized thinker in the room. So by maintaining a basic construct like pause, point, proof, pass it on, then that gives your brain, because you've already trained yourself, it gives your brain the structure to follow for you to interject for your 60-second comment. Any other questions before we wrap up for the day? No? Well, I thank Vicki and Dee Dee for being live with me today. And for all of you on the replay, thank you for watching. I hope this has been helpful. And if you have questions, just feel free to drop them in the comments and I will happily answer them. So have a great day, everyone.